Hi, welcome back to The Well. If you're new, I'm Lisette Hernandez, and I do practical and relatable Bible teachings, and also I talk about Christian living. The topic of this teaching is going to be not this year, and I'm going to be presenting a possible reason as to why we often have to wait for what God has prepared, or you could say for what God has promised us. Time is a funny thing. When you're young, you don't even know how to measure time, and you'll tell a kid 5 minutes, and is that a long time or 30 minutes? Sometimes we go through things and it sounds like it's not a long time. But if you put things into perspective, for example, is 6 months a long time? Well, it's a long time when you're unemployed. Is even 5 minutes a long time? Well, 5 minutes underwater is a long time. I don't know about you, but I kind of have this love-hate relationship with time. It's like I appreciate it because I try to measure my day and plan out a schedule and plan out my week. I'm that type of person who uses time to my advantage, and I try to make the most of it. And yes, I am a planner. I enjoy planning. Sometimes I just sit to make plans. I can't even just relax unless I have specifically planned time to relax. There was this quote once and it says, "Plan to be spontaneous." And it kind of makes no sense, right? But that's me. I can't relax without guilt. There's a sense of I should be doing something. I'm wasting time. Therefore, in my Christian life, this approach hasn't always helped me because I can make all the plans I want. People say man plans and God laughs. However, the Bible does say something about man's plans. And in Proverbs 16:9, it says, "In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." Therefore, there's nothing wrong with planning. I will continue to plan, but I have to know that it's going to be God who ultimately directs my steps. And when I do plan, I need to pray and to hear from the Lord, or else
might as well just throw those plans out the window.
Why am I talking about time and planning? Because when it comes to, let's say, waiting, God has something prepared for you. Maybe even in some way, God has confirmed and you're holding on to something as a promise. But why then the wait? What seems to be taking so long? In the wait, we become discouraged. We become disheartened, like it's never going to happen. Then, I don't know about you, but this happens to me. You start to doubt if that's even what God said. And I know as I've waited for things, waited for a husband, waited to have a child, how I am still waiting to have more children. Many people are waiting to own a home. Maybe they have graduated from college, but they're still waiting for a job opportunity. Why do we often have to wait for these things that God has prepared for us? And maybe this will help you as you wait. In the midst of a trial or waiting for something, if I could ask God for anything, it would be for Him to show me the timeline. How much I would love to see when, Lord. When is this coming? And there are a few cases in the Bible where God has said how long something would last. God told Abraham that his descendants would end up having to go through a period of slavery for 400 years. That time was made known to Abraham. God spoke through the prophet Jeremiah, telling the people that they would be in captivity for 70 years. So there are times where God reveals his timeline, the time frame until when something's going to happen. But I would say most of the time it doesn't. Think about your trials or think about the things you've had to wait for. How long typically do you have to wait? I know for me, it's usually more or less about a 2-year wait. I kind of picture it like God has an algorithm that He uses. He takes into consideration certain factors. For example, what He wants to accomplish, the type of person that He's dealing with, how much He knows we're going to resist the process, what He needs to do to get us to the place, or what He needs to work in us before He gives us what He has in mind for us. And He puts in all these calculations and boom, here is the amount of time that God has determined that you're going to have to wait. If I was able to know how long I probably would have dealt with things a little bit better. For example, I went through a process of infertility. If you haven't watched that video, I shared my full story. I started taking more seriously trying to conceive when I was 34. But if at that time, God would have let me know, listen, don't worry. You're going to go through a 2-year process. But when you're 36, you're going to deliver your son. I would have been kicked back, enjoying all those vacations I took. I did save money, thankfully, because I felt like I needed to do something to prepare. Like I needed to do my part. And I feel like that's part of this lesson. I think in that time frame, there's things that we can do, not only to speed up the time, because maybe we can't speed up the time. I don't really know how that works. Like, can we get out of a trial early for good behavior? I have no idea. But what I do know is often there's things that I can do, there's steps that I can make. And I know it feels like, well, I can't imagine one thing that God could be working on. Well, honestly, sometimes we're very blind to our own situations. If you ask someone else, someone of confidence, they might be able to give you a little insight into what they think that you could possibly work on as you wait for that which you believe is coming. Sometimes too, I feel like the restlessness we feel in the wait is because we have expectation. I remember saying that it was so annoying to me when people would say I would get pregnant when I stopped trying, because I would never stop trying, meaning I was never going to give up the hope and the expectation. Every month, every cycle, I was always hopeful and expectant. No matter what happened, I was always paying attention to signs. But on the other hand, there is a certain control factor that you need to let go of. And as a planner, I've struggled with understanding what part is I need to plan and what part is it that I just can't control. So I would say that this has to do with just overall hearing from God, letting yourself be led by the Holy Spirit, knowing the scriptures. I heard a preacher say not too long ago, the more you read your Bible, the more biblical principles you know, the less you panic about what to do. And that makes perfect sense. I understand the principle that when you give to God, He opens up the windows, and sometimes that comes in opportunities. That when you work for God, He works for you. When you give of yourself, you receive in turn. And we were working for the kingdom. We were doing everything that we could. But you know what? It was just an element of time. It was just a factor of time. But what do we do as we wait? We continue working. We continue growing. But I wanted to give you one reason, just one reason why I believe that often we have to wait. I don't think it's the only reason altogether, but it's the one that really stands out, and it's the one I want to share with you for today. And that reason is because we are not ready for it. As much as this may not be what you want to hear, because we're not ready for it. And I have 2 examples that I want to share, and they're both related because they're found not only in the book of Exodus, but they have to do with when the people were leaving slavery, the period of time of when they left slavery until they entered into the promised land. And the first verses are found in Exodus 13, and we're going to read verse 17 and 18. And it says, "When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle." And let me tell you, a brother in my church, Javier Acosta, he preached a message on this. And if you know Spanish, I'm going to find a way to either put in the description box, if I can't link it at the end of this video, for you to watch that preaching. I'll share the idea which he also preached about. God said, I know they're not mentally ready to face a battle. If I take them that way, which is shorter, meaning if I take them the shorter path, they're going to face something they're not ready for. And they just will likely return because I know them and I know their hearts. And when it comes to facing whether they're going to have to fight or whether they're going to return into bondage and slavery, they're more likely going to return back to slavery because they're not ready. They're not ready for this battle. And there's certain things in our lives that God has prepared for us. They're not just simply handed over for us. For example, you want a ministry, you're going to have to work hard for that ministry. You're going to have to know your scriptures. You're going to have to lead an example of testimony, of integrity. You're going to have to pray. You're going to have to give up and sacrifice of things for a greater good. You want a good family? Same thing. You want a good career? Let me tell you something. A lot of times people are like, oh, I wish I had your schedule because I teach at a college and I actually only work 7 months out of 12. But guess what? Nobody wanted my life when I was burning out my eyebrows in grad school. So back to the Israelites. And you know what? I often have taught class of writing. And as you read these verses, it feels like there's one sentence that doesn't fit. And sometimes as I'm reading, I'll go, what's the connection with this sentence to the paragraph? Because it tells you that God did not lead them on the faster way, right? That God took them around the Red Sea. And it says, so God led the people around by the desert. And then it says, the Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. But guess what? There's a huge connection there. It says the Israelites left Egypt ready for battle. So it wasn't that they weren't physically ready. See what I was saying earlier about how, wait, I don't get it. What is it that God needs to work in me? Because I have all these weapons, but guess what? You could have all the resources available to you, but still not be spiritually ready, emotionally ready. You could not be mature enough. I mean, the list goes on as to what it could be. But we know that it says that God said if they face war, they might change their minds. It's not because they weren't physically equipped. It's because their mindset was not in the right place. They were not mentally ready to fight against the Philistines. So God had to take them the long way around. And we're still in the topic of us not being ready. But the second example I want to give you as to why we often have to wait for what God has prepared for us comes from Exodus. And we're going to read from chapter 23. And it says in verse 23 of that same chapter, my angel will go ahead of you and bring you into the land of the, and it mentions the enemies who were in the promised land in Canaan. But the point is, the enemies are there. But it said, I will go ahead of you and I will wipe them out. The plan was always for God to destroy the enemies. That didn't mean they wouldn't have to fight, but it would be God's power. It would be God going ahead of them, but they would have to walk. In verse 27, I want to read that to you. It says, I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion every nation you encounter.
Praise God. We're like, yes, do that, Lord.
I will make all your enemies turn their backs and run. But listen to this. But I will not drive them out in a single year. What is God saying? But not this year. I'm going to do it. What I said, what I promised, the land I promised, it's going to be yours. I'm going to send my angel ahead. I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to wipe them out. But I'm not going to do this in 1 year. God actually revealed to them a type of timeline. Listen, he didn't say how long, but he said, well, it's not going to be a year. It's not going to be a year. It could be 2, 3. All I'm saying, it's not going to be a year. And some of the things that God's going to do in your life, unfortunately, it's hard to say because ultimately it's serving a greater good. It might not be what we want, but it's what God knows is best. And he says, but I will not drive them out in a single year. And this is my favorite part because, don't you want to know why, Lord? Because the land would become desolate and the wild animals will be too numerous for you. There is a practical reason why I have left the enemies in this land. And you might be saying, what could it be, Lord? What could possibly be the reason why you have promised a land to me, but my enemies remain in that land? And God's saying, because you're not ready for it. Because if I wipe them out, the wild animals that are present in that land will be too numerous. You're going to have to wait until you multiply, because right now you're not enough people to handle the land. And why would God give us something we're not ready to handle? If God's time is perfect and his ways are perfect, but they're above our ways, so we can't understand them. But I'm telling you right now, we just saw 2 reasons why the land was theirs. But number 1, they weren't mentally ready. And number 2, there were practical reasons. Some of the things you're praying for, you want, you are maybe begging God, and you might even be angry because we go through these emotions. And God is like, it's not time. It's not time. And God's like, I know what I'm doing. I have seen people go through things and wait, and I have seen how God has worked it out miraculously, amazingly. Believe that if you are looking for God's will, that you will have God's will. And number 2, that God wants what's best for you. If you want just anything, you can probably have that now. So I'm here to encourage you today. And it's not to be sad and say, oh, because I'm not ready. But just pray and ask God to help you to know what is it that you can do. Not to try to take control and manipulate circumstances. But know if there's something that you can do. And if not, wait, trusting that God hears your prayer and that he knows what's best, and get this, and when it's best. Because it may not be this year. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you continue coming back to the well for more teachings. God bless you. Bye.